Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I want to talk about gay men and when our mentors have flaws. As a gay men's specialist psychotherapist for over 30 years now in Los Angeles and West Hollywood, California, and as a life, career, relationship executive coach nationally and worldwide, a very frequent topic in my work with gay male clients is about both short-term and long-term planning and evolution of their personal lives and their professional careers. When people use the term work-life balance, they are underscoring this duality of life, work and play, because most adults who are not disabled in some way are working full-time in most cities and towns across the world. Gay men are no exception. In fact, many of the adult gay men that I work with are guys who have very significant positions in the commercial workplace, sometimes to extremes, such as being world leaders in their fields, but also less visible but still very important occupations and civic contributions. Much of our success in life, I believe, in both of these areas, involves not going about it alone. The old saying, "No man is an island," I found to be very true. I wouldn't be where I am as a successful professional and at least minimally functional adult if it weren't for so many people who were mentors and leaders as part of my personal and professional development that's gotten me to middle age now. We all have them: parents, teachers, professors, bosses, work mentors, and therapist coaches. We don't always have a therapist or a coach, but we have a lot of the others. We might have them to varying degrees, and of course, some are better inspirations and influencers than others, in a range that goes from being treasured inspirations in our lives to being perpetrators of a vile abuse that can leave us traumatized. And such is the variety of people we are exposed to in our development over time. Whether these figures are heroes or villains in our life's evolution, they have an impact. Recently, a discussion with a client involved him asking me how to cope when the mentors in our lives have flaws, when the people who are supposed to help and support us do not support us. They frustrate, disappoint, abandon, neglect, or even abuse us. What then? Like all hardships and challenges in life that I discuss with clients, when faced with a challenge, we try to construct an equal and opposite adaptive coping strategy for that challenge, whatever it is. Whether life throws at us good or bad, we are charged with coping with that and making the best of it, fortune or misfortune. I'd like to review now the different categories of leaders and influences in our lives and how we can make the most of these developmental relationships and how we cope when the people we trust to lead us have flaws that disappoint us. So let's take each of these categories in turn. Number one, our parents or our primary caregivers. These people are the ones who are charged with our immediate care from birth on through childhood. The laws of most countries demand that the well-being of children be addressed with basic physical and emotional support. These are usually our parents, but they can be others who are our primary caregivers who might not be our biological mother or father. They can be adoptive parents, they can be single people, two men, two women, or people who are non-binary or trans, or they can be grandparents or aunts and uncles, but someone has to legally and socially take care of us as children. From these primary caregivers is how we learn how to talk, at least in our first language. Deaf children would communicate in a different way in sign language, but for most children, it's about learning what sounds and words mean that make sense of our world. We learn that we need to eat and pee and poop and be protected from the elements and attend to our primary development, such as school and social interactions. It's a very important job. Loving and supportive parents create a stable environment that provides for optimal physical, emotional, psychological, and social development. However, when our parents, or whoever our primary caregivers are, have something wrong with them, the children under their care suffer. We all know of parents who have had a drug or alcohol problem. There are parents with personality disorders, and I've worked with many gay male clients who have had to overcome the challenges of these. There are parents who overwork, thinking they're just trying to provide for their children economically, when they're really impoverishing them emotionally from neglect that has long-lasting effects on emotional abandonment and trust and attachment style. Some parents are worse. They're the sources of emotional, physical, or sexual abuse who are guilty of gravely serious crimes. As heinous as this is, child welfare professionals the world over are all too familiar with just how often, and shockingly often, this is the case. It is bewildering just the number of severely damaged people who procreate and subject their offspring to the effects of their severe mental defects, leaving us all to grow up the best way we know how. So, what do we do about this? When we know that our parents or primary caregivers who raised us had flaws, what do we do to cope so that at least we have some chance of being functional and reasonably healthy, happy adults? First, I think we distinguish between being a child and being an adult. A child, by legal definition, is dependent on others and does not yet have the legal adult prerogatives to work, live unsupervised, buy alcohol or tobacco, vote, have sex with other consenting adults, drive a car, rent a car, enter into legal contracts, or bring legal suits, among other adult rights. However, when we are adults, there is a whole new status that we have. We become empowered to say that we are now the ones in charge of us, not others. We become empowered to apply critical thinking and reflecting upon our upbringing by others. What ideas from our upbringing do we want to keep? What ideas or teachings do we want to eschew, like bigotries and prejudices, scientific inaccuracies, or false beliefs? What values are we taught that we admire and want to adopt for our own adult comportment, versus what values do we find either not right for us or not right for society, or both? These will vary among nationalities, cultures, individual family values, and of course the values of us as individuals, our own value system that kind of serves as a compass for our lives. I work with the guys a lot about what feels right for your value system. Do we forgive ignorant, abusive, absent, or neglectful parents? Or do we hold them in contempt for their actions and how their actions have harmed us in ways that we need to somehow overcome in our adult lives? Do we continue to have the adult-child to adult-parent relationship, or do we create distance and estrangement, which is sometimes necessary for our own psychological well-being? Or do we enjoy a long-term relationship with supportive parents who not only raised us, but serve as a source of love and companionship and family cohesion for the long term, usually until they age and pass away? Or is it in between, where we live fairly independent adult lives, far away from our parents and family of origin, in order to have relationships and careers and recreational activities and a family of choice with others, and only a limited or cursory relationship to our parents or family of origin? For so many LGBT plus people, we have to navigate and negotiate and periodically reassess how much we are oriented to our family of origin versus our family of choice. For some people, the aftermath of our childhood is relationship not to still living parents, but a relationship with their memory, the way we have internalized our understanding of our parents who were no longer living. Their lives might have ended, but the attachment relationship endures inside us. giving us either comfort and inspiration or unfortunate and pervasively bad memories that haunt us and still undermine our current adult functioning. Critical thinking is our friend here. Alcoholics Anonymous has a saying about their program that gives its members wide latitude for interpreting it. They say, take what you want and leave the rest. You have to do what's right for you in the adult value system that helps you get by in life. We take things from our primary caregivers that were educational and useful and practical, inspiring, or even amusing or fun, and we very consciously leave the rest that was associated with their flaws behind, and we don't carry them into our adult lives. There's this feeling that, the buck stops here. Another saying is that sometimes the apple falls far from the tree. Some children grow up to be almost duplicates of their parents' values, functions, opinions, or even professions and hobbies, while others, oftentimes gay men in relation to their fathers, are very different from the adult function that was behaviorally modeled for them by their parents. In using critical thinking, we get to use our own adult empowerment rights, the adult prerogative, to make those choices and sort it all out. Next, let's look at teachers and professors. Next to parents, the school teachers from even pre-kindergarten on up through graduate school in some cases are the biggest influences on our lives. And okay, maybe in these days of social media there are other influencers, but that's debatable. But the quality of the knowledge, skills, and personalities of our teachers can and will have a very direct influence on our adult functioning, especially around the quality of our education to equip us to be skilled workers later who know how to read critically, spell, do math, and understand how our civic governments work in the context of national or global history. We all know the quality of our education, the quality of the material and curriculum, the skills and talents of the faculty, and the number of years of educational opportunities we all have a big impact on what we do, what we earn, and how we live as adults. So, what happens when our teachers or professors have flaws? When they are misinformed and teach us erroneous material? When they are bigoted or biased and teach us bigoted beliefs about race or ethnicity or nationality or gender, or certainly about LGBT orientation? We have plenty of highly bigoted teachers in the United States teaching outright lies to further their sadistic, bigoted campaign against minority groups or even people with disabilities. We are taught racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, classism, privilege, discrimination, patriarchal ideas, and just plain hate at alarmingly high frequency in the United States, and certainly elsewhere, especially in the context of religious-based educational settings. This is how bigotry gets perpetuated anew with every generation. In the words of the classic Broadway musical lyricist Oscar Hammerstein II, you have to be carefully taught to hate and fear the people your relatives hate. That's from his musical South Pacific, which confronted issues of racism in the late 1940s, when touring productions in the American South of South Pacific were sometimes barred from including this musical number in their productions there. In fact, with my interest in the history of Broadway musicals as a hobby, when Oscar Hammerstein II's heirs sold his catalog of music to a corporation for the royalty rights for some big sum, the one provision that they demanded, the one provision as a course of the sale, of all the musical content, of all the different contingencies they could have placed on the sale, was that song must always be included in every contract of the performance production rights to produce that play. I find that inspiring and admirable of his heirs, because Hammerstein was so adamant about confronting prejudice as a Jewish and very gay-friendly man, a mentor of later classic Broadway gay composer and lyricist Stephen Sondheim. So when our teachers do have flaws, or prejudices, or inaccuracies, or even impairments from drug abuse, alcohol, psychological, or medical disorders, I think we cope with this simply by a shift of emphasis. Listen critically to what you were taught, or what you were taught in your educational career, however long or short that was. Try to avail yourself of the most skilled and credentials in instructors you can find in whatever field it is. Read from multiple sources, seek out debate, and be able to critically examine how the knowledge they imparted was obtained. Was it from legitimate research? Are their scholarly sources sound? Are they somehow acknowledging that every teacher or professor is a product of their time and place in history? How about a high school health teacher who is a conservative religious evangelical in Tennessee differ in her presentation of adolescent sex education versus a progressive teacher in a public school in San Francisco? Same topic, adult health and sexual education, but probably very different emphases or content or approaches. Again, critical thinking is our friend. Good teachers are worth their weight in gold. Bad ones, and some of mine were great, and some of them were outright vile, perpetuate the earth's ills. The stakes are very high when it comes to impacting an entire generation worldwide of our young children. Number 3, let's look at bosses. The idea of flawed leadership in the workplace, or the bad boss, is so commonplace it's comical. TikTok performers often use complaints about bosses as seemingly endless material for satire or even serious exposure of wrongdoing. Workplace bullying has been one of my many clinical interest topics for many years now. I was a victim of a very severe case of this when I was younger at an AIDS service organization, no less, by a woman leading programs for children with AIDS. Go figure on that, right? And this was after being sexually harassed by a gay male boss at another AIDS service organization who pinched my ass in front of the entire staff every time he passed me in the office. That was not fun. I didn't want to get fired, so I just laughed it off. When I complained to my colleague, the colleague told the boss, and the boss cut my employment from full-time to part-time. But I needed his signature on my forms to sit for my state license in California, so I kept my mouth shut. Now you see why I take a dim view of nonprofit organizations and the public sector. My husband was also a victim of workplace bullying by a woman who systematically fired every gay man in her department at a museum in Los Angeles after punching a male colleague in the workplace after a staff meeting and receiving no discipline for it. After those, a good number of my gay male clients came to me with their own stories as I was older and doing my work, and hearing about how they were recovering from traumas and PTSD symptoms, some of whom I supported through their lawsuits and subsequent settlements for discrimination or harassment. So bad bosses and toxic workplaces are definitely a phenomenon. Fortunately, things that happened 20 years ago that went unpunished probably wouldn't be tolerated in today's workplace. But if the executive brings in enough money into the organization, they get away with a lot. Harvey Weinstein's movies made hundreds of millions of dollars. Even though he was eventually convicted, it went on for a long time in his wrongdoing. So bad bosses can have a substance abuse problem. They can have a diagnosable psychiatric personality disorder. They might have bipolar disorder, although certainly not all people who have such clinical challenges are bad bosses. Bad bosses can have deep-seated insecurities that make their behavior hostile or violent or neurotic. They can have bigoted values and indulge in all kinds of discrimination. Or they might be poorly educated, or poorly trained, or have excessive privilege. They might be the product of nepotism in the organization, or they might be just plain stupid. There's always that. Bad bosses not only ruin our opportunity for workplace fulfillment and they stymie our skills or stunt our professional growth or cause chronic stress, sometimes severely, they can drive us to be suicidal. It's a serious phenomenon, and I've worked with guys who've been through that. So what do we do about the bad boss? Fortunately, the law in many jurisdictions is getting better about protecting us, but of course justice on paper and how it plays out are different things. Just one payoff, just one called in favor of cronyism, just one old boys network, just one us girls gotta stick together, etc., can facilitate injustice not unlike our criminal courts. To cope, I always recommend to cope in the short term with a bad work situation, a toxic office, and then get the hell out in the long term. Find better pastures, move on. It's just one stop in the train ride of your career. Because good bosses are a key ingredient of a successful career, I've had my share of those too, and to a small degree, the good ones and the horrible ones were sometimes combined in one person. That's another example of take what you want and leave the rest. Good bosses recognize that we are at that employer only temporarily. We have dreams and goals beyond that one specific work setting and in the whole field or profession, usually. And they can help bridge our education background with the realities of the commercial workplace. They impart experience that only comes with a lot of time working in the field. They don't just assign, prioritize, and evaluate our work. They also know when to support us and positively reinforce our actions to build our confidence, and when to challenge us to frankly work smarter or harder or to do better, to stretch into our full potential. Supportive negative feedback is one of the most valuable things a person can receive. There's a saying with this among playwrights: you don't want your opening night audience to be the first one to tell you that your play stinks. You want to know before and be able to improve it over time. You're always a work in progress, as is your work. To cope, it's important to recognize that people who kind of have a screw loose, that's the formal clinical term for it, get jobs, including supervisory jobs. We have to realize that their compliments to us can be shallow and give us a false sense of our skills, like so many of my graduate students who were passed with good papers in high school and college and then appeared illiterate in my courses because no one ever bothered to actually read their work and teach them how to write. Their criticisms can be products of their own biases and neuroses. We have to cultivate the skill of seeking out good professional settings where we can learn something during our tenure there, however long it is, in addition to just doing the job for a paycheck. The best bosses know this, the worst bosses ignore it or dismiss it. Good bosses help us refine our skills in the field and coach us on interpersonal relations with customers or colleagues and influencing others. The elements of vital business economics and the importance of fair and equitable treatment can also be embodied by the good boss, either by demonstrating this just every day or not demonstrating this, and in that way they're kind of teaching us exactly what not to do. There's kind of a negative behavioral modeling that we can learn from as well. Just like with our abuse perpetrators in other settings, forgiving our perpetrators may or may not be part of the process. But understanding their motivations objectively can help. It's not really us if they're neurotic. They can be products of their own rage or greed or bigotry or lust or lack of impulse control, but dressed up in a workplace setting. We have to get support when we feel isolated or mistreated or even frightened by the bad boss. We cope like we're a prisoner of war or a hostage. You just lay low and survive. Later, you get support for healing from the traumatic experience. But you're also under no obligation to keep their vile secrets. The temptation to name names, even here now with me, is great. But discretion is the better part of valor and some legal implications, so I'll let them stay anonymous. But they don't really deserve that consideration, and your perpetrators don't either. But if anyone tells you that women are always workplace bullying victims and men are always perpetrators, correct them. Because this is something I've been seeing a lot, especially sometimes how women cannot respect gay men and see them as easy targets. This is definitely a pattern that I've seen in the past 30 years. Foul, abusive behavior is not limited to any one gender or race or ethnicity or nationality or sexual orientation. It's all wrong, whoever it comes from. The next category is work mentors. Not everyone has these, but if you can find a work mentor, they can be a great source of age-old wisdom, superior knowledge or skills, guidance, inspiration, emotional support, validation, and supportive challenge that helps us to grow in our professional identity. They can be bosses, but they can also be wise and skilled colleagues, and they might even work for other companies or institutions, or they certainly might be retirees from the same field. Retirees are a great source of mentorship. They want to find ways to feel useful and make contributions, especially to the younger worker, and we want their support. I think everyone would do well to seek them out and gain a lot of good advice for the price of taking them out to lunch once in a while. But when our mentors disappoint us, when they give us advice that doesn't work out, or they do something that crosses our own value system, it can sting. It can feel like a betrayal of a professionally intimate relationship. Just recently, I made a glib remark in the name of humor with a client in the course of a session, and this client loves to tell jokes to end his sessions, just for a small portion of the work. But I accidentally said something in a way that I know sounded insensitive. And then we talked about it, and I clarified how I felt I misspoke, but I still felt bad. But I could see it momentarily in his face that at least in that moment, he was disappointed in me. I was kind of worried he would fire me as his therapist over it, but he didn't. And, but clients have discontinued work with their therapist for less. I had a client who quit therapy just after seeing me in the grocery store after the gym when I was wearing a tank top and sweats and buying some lunch. I'll never know exactly what the trigger was, but seeing me in a different setting and in a different attire and in a different context somehow upset his equilibrium about our frame of work, we call it. When we are mentoring someone ourselves, we have to accept that we can and will disappoint our charges despite our best efforts. The best thing is to discuss when that happens and find a way to acknowledge the rupture and work toward repair, if they don't ghost us first. A mentor who helps us work through challenges is a valuable one. Now, this is true with somebody who's a worker who has a mentor, but it can also be another type of provider, like I said, like a therapist or a doctor. And certainly working through ruptures toward repair would be an important part of relationships and couples therapy or relationship coaching. One of my mentors was the late great Michael Chernoff, LCSW, a gay men's specialist therapist in New York City in the 80s and 90s. He was the founder of the first gay-related therapy website, gaypsychotherapy.com, which was taken down after his death, but it contained a lot of great material of his writings. But I was very hurt one year when I was in New York for just one day, and I wanted to see him, but he declined because he told me, "I don't miss yoga class." And at first I thought this was awkward or even petty, but then I realized he was showing me a strong commitment to work-life balance and his own burnout prevention self-care. I don't miss yoga. My self-care routine is not yoga, although it probably should be for its many health benefits, but I did commit more strongly to my self-care boundaries after that. He modeled that behavior for me for doing that. Every moment with him was a learning experience. I always said, I want to be you when I grow up. And of course, I was already working adult. And he said, thanks, you're getting close. But don't be a copy of me. Be the original you. Even if we have the same goals, like supporting the mental health and well-being, specifically of gay men in our work, find your own way. He wrote a lot of academic articles. I write blog articles and do a podcast. It's just different. It's kind of a different generation. And the next category is more on what we've said, therapists and coaches. So I gave an example when I, as a therapist coach, likely disappointed my client. It happens. When a therapist disappoints you, acceptance of its occurrence is important. We try to avoid that, but we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of sentences and questions and decisions in our work in trying to help a client with their sometimes very specific challenges. Not all of those are going to be our best work every day. Therapy is like live television. Occasionally you're going to blow your lines. So if this happens to you, I think it's important to say that the therapist disappointed you and why. It gives you practice in validating your own feelings enough to speak on them, and it gives you practice in assertive communication and self-advocacy in a very safe space. If you criticize your therapist and they get all defensive and yell at you, hey, I've heard it happen, then it's not so much what you say with your mouth, it's what you do with your feet. You get up and leave, Or what you do with your finger, you hit the N key in your online session. No therapist should ever yell at you or shame you or be defensive. They might want to explain or want to share the context or some additional meaning to what they said or what they thought they meant they said. But no therapist should be dismissive or condescending or patronizing or devaluing. Sometimes good work can be done by working through and processing the nuance of our differences or even awkward moments, not unlike what we might see in couples therapy who work through their issues to achieve a compromise or a resolution to move on with the relationship. Therapists are always products of their own undergraduate and graduate formal, academic training, and some institutions provide a more sound clinical and academic curriculum than others. Therapists can conduct themselves as product of their own post-graduation pre-licensed clinical supervision when they work under the leadership of someone who would sign off on their hours for them to be eligible to sit for state licensing exams. And clinical supervision, I've done a lot of this, over 20 years worth of that with dozens of young therapists. And it varies from non-existence. Some nonprofits that I've been at, or the public sector, they just fake the forms for the state board. And they just say they had hours of clinical supervision, an hour a week, for 2 years when it didn't happen. And that's really not a good thing. That's highly unethical. But it happens. Or sometimes people are good about that and they follow the law that they provide an hour of or more of clinical supervision to young therapists before they're licensed. Therapists are left with their own understanding and even interpretation of the standards of care of the profession, or legal statutes, or resolution of ethical dilemmas. They can vary in their level of clinical intervention skills, or specialization, or cultural competency and sensitivity, and even their ability to work in the context of their own health and stamina. Michael Chernoff, who I mentioned earlier, unfortunately passed away of pancreatic cancer, and he wrote an article about what it was like to stop his work with clients because of his own declining health. Therapists can differ in their values with each other and with colleagues. Anti-LGBT bigots get state license to practice therapy. It's called Texas. Okay, I'm kidding. But specialization of knowledge, I think, is especially important for clients of highly specific populations to feel heard and understood. And this is, hence my long career as a gay men's and HIV and gay men's sex therapy specialist. We know how to stay in our lane. I don't presume to treat teenage girls with eating disorders. I'm licensed to, I could, but ethically I refer to colleagues who specialize in this, plus various other population or situation niches. So, in conclusion, all of these categories of mentors are the people who help shape us beyond our own individual, cultural, physical, and genetic makeup. All of us are part nature, part nurture, and that's just human development. Good mentors affirm our existence and our dignity, provide support, and yet also model for us boundaries and limits and compromises and acceptance of a sometimes very difficult reality. They also provide exciting challenges for growth that make life interesting throughout the lifespan. But we have to put our faith in someone, or we grow neurotic in a state of isolation. Organisms that interact with their environment evolve. Social workers are taught about the person and environment theory. There's the person and then there's the environment, and the two influence each other. So if a mentor type has disappointed you, strive to understand why, and see if you can still extract some kind of value or meaning from that experience. As the saying goes, take what you want and leave the rest. If you'd like some specific help for the challenges that you face, please consider therapy for individuals and couples and polycules in California, or life, career, relationship, executive coaching nationwide in the US or worldwide. And there's some very important legal and ethical differences between these two professional services, and we can discuss those. As with all social media content, please don't take this as a substitute for formal psychotherapy. That's an important agreement we need to have or to make clear. But if you like the show, check out other episodes and give a review or a like or a share, or recommend the show to a friend who you might think might benefit from this or other episodes. For more information about working with me, you can call or text in the U.S. 310-339-5778. Again, that's 310-339-5778. Or email me, ken@gaytherapyla.com. And gaytherapyla.com is my website that gives you more information about services and also holds a blog article library of hundreds of articles that might be relevant to you. I'd be happy to help, even if I occasionally, and hopefully only occasionally, disappoint. Let's try it and see. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.